I was watching Hatman's video on Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua, and what would happen next if Daniel Dubois were to beat Anthony Joshua. And what's going into this fight, I, like many others, would make Anthony Joshua favourite. At the end of the day, this is heavyweight boxing. Daniel Dubois, in my opinion, with the exception of maybe Vladimir Klitschko, is probably the biggest puncher Anthony Joshua has faced as a professional. And he may very well, as I said, I don't know how hard Klitschko hits in comparison to Daniel Dubois. He may very well hit harder, who knows? He's certainly a very, very big puncher. He's certainly a very strong, physically strong individual. Even though he may be lighter than Anthony Joshua, he may actually be the stronger of the two when it comes to up close. So could I rule out the possibility of Daniel Dubois winning? No, and he's definitely on a good run of form. He definitely seems to have a lot more confidence, a bit more spring in his step. He is younger, he's got that young energy. So as much as I make Anthony Joshua favourite, would it be a monumental, seismic upset if Dubois won? Well, no, not really. And Hatman talked in that video about what would Daniel Dubois do next, and he gave his 2 cents. He feels that if Daniel Dubois was to win, the most likely thing would be probably they would do the Fury fight, because they're both with Queensberry. It's in-house. They could do it in Saudi Arabia. They could get Fury a world title. He could fight Anthony Joshua in a world title fight. It could be Usyk versus Fury 2 again for undisputed. It could just get pushed back, and that's more time. There's a lot of things you could do potentially if he beats Anthony Joshua. But one thing he mentioned in that video, which I just felt like I had to talk about, was, in Hatman's opinion, the best fight to make would be Daniel Dubois. Now, this is all just... this may never happen. This is all like if he wins. If Daniel Dubois wins. But he was saying the best fight to make, in his opinion, would be Dubois versus Atelma. Moses Atelma is the man who is chasing Mike Tyson's record as youngest heavyweight champion. I actually interviewed Moses Atelma before his pro debut back January last year. And God, how old was he? He was only about 18, I think, at the time. And he definitely came across... You'd never think he was only 18. He definitely has a maturity about him beyond most. Like, you see most people in their early 20s nowadays, and you're just like, what the hell? Moses Atelma, I mean, he is mature well beyond his years. For someone who, at amateur level, I think he told me he only had just over 20 or so amateur fights, at a decent level. But he looked great as an amateur. That's how I seen him in the amateur games. And he looked very good, very polished, and he wanted to turn pro to break Mike Tyson's record. And winning an IBF title, well, before May of next year, would do that. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. I mean, it would be... Atelma doesn't have that kind of Johnny Fisher. Like, Atelma is leagues ahead of Johnny Fisher. I'm just going to use him as a comparison because Johnny Fisher is... He's not... It would be unfair to say he's at a similar stage in his career because I think Atelma is way ahead of Johnny Fisher. But Johnny Fisher is a British prospect, and obviously we know who Johnny Fisher is. Just got a win over Alan Babbage. He has that more kind of, Essex. He keeps saying Bosch. He has his dad, who's, a very colourful character, and he has that kind of everyman feel to him, and people flock to see him. In spite of the fact I don't think his ceiling is necessarily high. Whereas Atelma, he is getting eyes on him, but not to the same extent as Johnny Fisher. And obviously Atelma is a lot younger than Johnny Fisher. He's much younger than Johnny Fisher. He's not even 20 yet. There's still a lot that can, happen in terms of, getting him known to the wider public. But if he was to fight Daniel Dubois, and let's say he won and broke Tyson's record, Frank Warren has a star there. Because that's not something that could just be sold in the UK. I mean, that's a worldwide thing. In America, you'd hear this kid, this 19, 20-year-old kid from, I think he's from London, Atelma, breaks Mike Tyson's record. It would just, honestly, like, Frank would have a star there on his hands. 110%, without any shadow of a doubt, he'd have a star on his hands. Now, Atelma's fighting the end of this month. I think he's fighting on the Chisora card, if I'm not mistaken. The Chisora Joe Joyce card. He's fighting Marius Vac. Now, That to me, although Mariusz Vak at this stage now, I think he's in his mid 40s now, and yeah, he was never that good even in his prime. I remember in 2012, I think it was, he fought Vladimir Klitschko. Took a hell of a lot of right hands in that fight. That was incredible. But even then, he was never amazing. He was never amazing, but he's always been durable. He's always been game, and even in the fights where he has been stopped, for the most part, he's stopped standing. Only been down once as a professional, and that was against Arsen Makhmudov. So he's very durable. Now Atelma is still in that prospect kind of learning phase. He's been blasting guys out early in his last couple of fights, been really looking impressive. The hand speed is just incredible from Atelma. It really is. The combination punches are, honestly, that hand speed is something insane. He's been getting rid of guys early. This is going to be a real test. And this is going to be one of those fights that I think it's a 10-rounder. So this will go long. This will not be an early knockout job. No way. So it's going to be interesting to see how Atelma paces himself during those rounds. It's going to tell us a little bit about him. But after that, he'd need to, obviously, if he was to even attempt to fight for a version of the IBF title, he'd need to be in the rankings. And he's not, obviously. Now, the IBF haven't released their rankings for June yet. So they only have as far as May. So they have Alexander Usyk still listed as champion here on their official website, and Dubois down as the interim champion. So they have updated that anyway. So Dubois is listed as the interim champion. That will change on the next rankings to him being the full champion. So number 1 and number 2 is now not ranked. So Joshua is there at number 3. He's obviously not going to fight Anthony Joshua. Caballel number 4, can't see that. Anderson number 5, can't see that. Fury number 6, can't see that. See where I'm going with this. Zhang number 7, can't see that. And this is if he beats, which he should, Mariusz Vak. Who would he fight next? Zhang number 7, can't see that. Sanchez number 8, can't see that. Ajagba number 9, possibly could see that. Hrgovic number 10, can't see that. Joyce number 11, depending on how Joyce looks against Eric Chisora, because I expect him to win. Depending on how Joyce looks, I still think that's too soon. That would be man against boy. Otto Wallin number 12, I can see that. I could definitely see that, because I could make a very good case that if he was to fight Otto Wallin and beat Moses Atelma, and I probably would See, I'm looking at this and thinking, if I was managing Atelma, would I put him in with Otto Wallin? Not in his next fight, the fight after. Probably not if I was managing him. I'd probably be looking for another durable guy who's going to take him rounds, who's going to make him think. I wouldn't chuck him in with Otto Wallin necessarily. Otto Wallin is a real spoiler, but he's one of those guys he can spoil, but he can pick up rounds at the same time. You don't want to put him in there with someone who's going to spoil his way to a win. But saying that, Otto Wallin, that Joshua fight, that is a damaging loss. Don't know how he's going to come back from that. That'd be the fight I'd take, because the other guys are Fabio Wadley, not going to do that. Bacoli, definitely not. Justice Hooney, I haven't been impressed with Justice Hooney, but I think he's still too fresh. So the only fighter out of the top 15 that I would look at and say, okay, yeah, I could match him with him and I would have a more confidence in that, would be Otto Wallin. Now, Otto Wallin is only ranked number 12, so if he beats Otto Wallin, you would imagine he'd be in the bottom half of the top 15. Therefore, that would qualify him to get a crack at an IBF title. Would he beat Daniel Dubois? Listen, I think Atelma is tremendous. Honestly, I've said that from the start. When I seen him as an amateur, and some of his amateur fights are there on YouTube, I was looking at him and I was like, oh, this kid's special. This kid has something seriously good about him. This kid has this incredible. He's been sparring top guys since he was a young teenager, wearing his school uniform, going into the gym to spar Lawrence Okoli, who was already a world champion, I believe, at the time, or was certainly a high-level contender at the time. That takes a certain amount of confidence. That takes a certain type of person to do that. And hearing all these stories about Atelma, seeing what I can see, I know he's in there with guys who are not that good at the minute, but seeing the combination punching, seeing the punching power, the hand speed, the footwork, everything about it, he looks so polished. Johnny Fisher may have the bigger fan base, but if they were to fight next, it wouldn't even be competitive. Atelma would just blitz him. Seriously, Atelma would just blitz him. So I think Atelma's ceiling is very high. But as I said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But saying that, I am someone as well. There's nothing better than seeing a record you didn't think could be broken and it getting broken in any sport. In any sport. There are certain records where you look at them and you'd say, that's unlikely it'll ever get broken. Understand, unlikely. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that probably won't. Like, Wilfred Benitez is the youngest champion in boxing history. He was 17 years and about 5 months old, thereabouts. 17 years of age and 5 months old. Not even 17 and a half. Just think about that for a second. A 17-year-old boy. Because you would seriously, if you're 17, you're a boy. A 17-year-old boy was a world champion, youngest world champion in boxing history. It is extremely unlikely that will ever get broken. It's extremely unlikely that will ever get broken. You look at other sports. You look at a sport like darts. I know people want to talk about, Luke Littler and how good he is, and he's tremendous. And they're saying, could he break Phil Taylor's record, 16-time world champion? Extremely unlikely, as good as he is, for a variety of reasons. Much better players now, and a much more consistent players now than they were back when Phil Taylor was dominating. Much more money now, so the motivation isn't quite there where it used to be, where you can win a European tour and get 30 grand. In the 90s you could have won. I know with the 90s money was a little bit different back then. 50 grand went a lot further then than it does today. But you get what I mean. They weren't playing for as much money back then. So the incentive, you see dart players fired. You see dart players who they've played darts top level for 10 years and they're just like, no motivation anymore. I'm a multi-millionaire. What do I need to do it for? And you're kind of like, fair enough, I get you. So there are certain records are unlikely to be broken, but doesn't mean they can't. Mike Tyson's record can be broken as youngest heavyweight champion. Do I think Atelma was the man to do it? He could, but should he? I don't know. As much as I want to see it broken, at the same time you look at Atelma and you just think, is there any real rush? But saying that, if he loses to Dubois, he'd be 20 years old. I mean, as I always say, a loss isn't the end of the world if you learn from it. And a loss, even depending on the nature of the loss, if you're in your early 30s and you've had a long career and stuff like that, you might say, yeah, stick a fork in him. He'd be 20 with one loss. Depending on the nature of it, it might even not make a difference. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one to think about. Atelma versus Dubois. If Dubois beats Joshua, could it happen? Well, I'll leave that to you guys in the comment section. Could it happen? And if it did, who would you have? Dubois, when he joined Queensberry and turned over with them, he was a teenager as well. I think he was older than Atelma, though. I think he was about 19 or so. Well, he turned over with them. Dubois had his first fight with Queensberry. I can't remember the card, but it was in 2017. So you're talking 7 years. Crazy. So he would have been about 19 when he made his pro debut. So he was never as young as Atelma was. Just turned 19, I think, or just turned 18 when he made his pro debut. So he's a lot younger. Well, not, you know what I mean. He's not that much younger, but he is younger. But Atelma has a different feel to him than Daniel Dubois. There's a different vibe to Atelma. You see a lot more talent there. You just saw a brute force early on with Daniel Dubois. You don't see that. You see a lot more to Atelma's game. And he just comes across as just a much more outwardly confident, quite a reserved individual, a bit like Dubois, but not to that extent. He doesn't give that much away, but you can tell the confidence is there. When you speak to him, you can tell this kid has it. This kid has that confidence. This kid has it all up there, And yeah, I think he's tremendous talent, but should he, if the opportunity is there, should he take it? And that's a lot of thinking now. You're looking at Joshua Dubois and thinking, Dubois has to win, then the Fury fight doesn't have to happen, and then maybe they'll do it. Maybe. It's all those ifs and buts. God damn, it's something to think about, isn't it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. Peace.